Hi, myself, I'm Ratna Bhushan, a friend, motivator, and guide to IAS aspirant, international motivational speaker, leadership trainer, CEO, coach, political strategist, and policy advisor. Is COVID-19 setting off a Brady canine storm in the body? Why are some patients showing a rapid accumulation of fluid in the lungs? What have scientists found out? The studies of a scientist are still trying to understand the causes for the rapid deterioration in some patients with COVID-19. While the cytokine storm is able to explain certain aspects of the what goes wrong, doctors treating patients are often perplexed by the severity with which SARS-CoV-2 virus seems to affect some people. A supercomputer's recent analysis of data and the contents collected earlier from the lungs of the patient with the COVID-19 infections has showed that a phenomena called bradykinin storm might explain how the virus works in the body, including some of the more puzzling extreme events. How has this explanation emerged? This plausible explanation has emerged from the data analysts work that a CITES team of scientists led by the Dan Jacobson at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory ORLN in the US have been doing, employing the supercomputer summit in a paper published in July in eLife peer-reviewed journal. Michael R. Gravin et al. Advance the bradykinin hypothesis as a means of explaining some of the more deadly effects the virus has on the human body. What is the bradykinin hypothesis? Bradykinin hypothesis. Bradykinin is compound that is related to pain sensation and lowering blood pressures in the human body. According to researchers, SARS-CoV-2 uses a human enzyme called ACE2 like a Trojan horse to sneak into a cells of its host. ACE2 lowers blood pressures in the human body and works against another enzyme known as ACE, which has the opposite effect. The analysis further found that the virus caused the levels of ACE to fall in the lungs and consequently passed up levels of ACE2 as a chain reaction. This caused increases the levels of the molecule bradykinin in the cells, causing a bradykinin storm. Bradykinin caused the blood vessels to expand and become leaky, leading to a swelling of the surrounding tissue. In addition to the levels of the substance called hyaluronic acid, which can absorb more than 1,000 times its own weight in water to form a hydrogel increase. Inhaling polluted air can lead to brain damage. Inhaling polluted air can lead to brain damage. Inhaling polluted air can lead to brain damage. Mice exposed to a dirty air formed amyloid deposits and tangles in the brains. New researchers on mice shows that continually inhaling dirty air could be bad, not just for the lungs but also for the damage the brain tissue. In the study led by Richard and Jer, Stanford University, 8 male mice were exposed to polluted air and 8 controls were exposed to a filtered air. Afterwards, in examining the brain tissues of the 16 mice, researchers found that the mice that inhaled dirty air had developed amyloid deposits, neurofibrillary tangles and plaques, while those that had inhaled filtered air showed no such development. The study was conducted at the chemistry department of the Fudan University at Shanghai, Chinese, and the results are presented in a paper that has been accepted for the publication in the journal Talenta Open. Damaged brains. While the whole of the experiment lasted 2 years, the mice were exposed to dirty air 6 days a week, 8 hours a day for 24 weeks. The researchers used a number of different analytical techniques to examine different tissues. Of course, the lungs were quite different, but I had not expected find what my postdoc Dr. Sarah and Hamid observed, namely damage to the brains of all the mice exposed to dirty air, but essentially no damage in the brains of mice exposed to a clean air. The Transitional Arm Law. The Transitional Arm Law, International Criminal Court. US sanctions against ICC officials are seen as a setback to multilateralism. Rarely does a court dispensing justice and find itself at the receiving end of the punishment, yet in a statement this week, the US did in fact announce sanctions including assets freezes and visa bans against two officials of the International Criminal Court at The Hague. The officials are ICC prosecutor Fatih Bensouda and the ICC head of the jurisdiction's Complementary and Cooperation Division, Fakisco Foucault, who was sanctioned for having materially assisted prosecutor Bensouda for an investment into alleged war crimes by US forces and the Central Intelligence Agency CIA. Central Intelligence Agency CIA in Afghanistan since 2003, announcing the decision US Secretary of State like Mike Pompeo called ICC a thoroughly broken and corrupted institution, threatening that the US will not tolerate the ICC illegitimate attempts to subject Americans to its jurisdiction, and particularly Mr. Pompeo pointed out that US had never ratified the Roman Statute, which created in ICC in 1998, thus was not subject to its rulings. The Special Frontier Force, bloodshed in the battle and fighting in the shadows. LAC tensions have turned the spotlight on the elite force that played pivotal roles in the past, from the liberating Bangladesh to the Kargil War. On 14th November, the Elite Special Frontier Force (SFF) Special Frontier Force will turn 58 for an organization that has served India for close to 6 decades and played some important pivotal roles in the key moments of Indian history, for the liberating Bangladesh to fighting in the Kargil War. SFF full form is Special Frontier Force. Special Frontier Force. Special Frontier Force has surreptitiously stayed out the headlines until recent. The death of the SFF soldier on August 30, who was deployed along the recently tense line of actual control that separates India and China, has now set the spotlight of SFF and its predominantly Tibetan soldiers. Company leader Nema Tenjin was killed in an accidental mine blast when he stepped over a vintage 1962 minefield during patrolling in Ladakh, according to the army sources. His untimely death and the deployment of the SFF amid the recent tensions with China has not only brought unexpected attention to highly trained and elite force, but also emerged as a force of pride for India's Tibetan community, as underlined by a video from September 4 that showed Tibetans in the Simla gathering and staying their traditions, katas, white scarves to a departing convoy as they waved goodbye to SFF personnel headed for the Ladakh front. The limelight is certainly unusual for the elite outfit trained to working in the shadows, and it's in the shadows where the SFF has mostly operated since its creation in 1962. SFF, Special Frontier Force. SFF's antecedent, in fact, even predate 1962. This is a story that goes back to the mid-1950s, when Tibetan resistance fighters began crossing over into India. Starting with the 1956 uprising, more fighters would follow in the wake of the failed uprising 3 years later, and Dalai Lama exiled to India. The 6,000 or so fighters who remained in India would be given a new opportunity in 1962 when then Intelligence Bureau Chief B.N. Mullak put forward the idea of setting up a training center for Tibetan fighters. Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru turned to Major General Sujan Singh Uban, who had earlier commanded the 22 Mountain. The first challenge was finding a base, recalls his son, Inspector General IG Gurdeep Singh Uban, retired, who was then a second lieutenant, is 22 and decided to help out his father. We hired a taxi from Delhi and drove to Chakrata, Uttarakhand, where my father knew was an old Gurkha training center that was lying vacant. He told the Hindu it had all the over-Vidal barracks training grounds, and most importantly, it had training areas such as rocking climb and was a height of 7,000 feet, and there the story began. The unit was raised on November 14, In 1962, on Nehru's birthday, exactly 19, November 14, 1962, on Nehru's birthday, exactly a week later, China would announce unilateral ceasefire, so the unit would see no actions in the war in case they were hardly ready for the actions. Mr. Uban said his father first called the outfit of establishment of 22 and named after his old mountain regiment that he was particularly fond of. The two twos, as they would be known, would be a paratroopers, an elite unit capable of high altitude warfare, special operations, and fighting behind enemy lines. They would report to Cabinet Secretariat and were not part of army. A women's wing was also created. He recalled the passion of the first cohort. What really struck me was both the anger and the shame of what happened to Tibet and Dalai Lama was a god for them, he said, and also their incredible athleticism. I think Tibetans are blessed with the genetics, which is why the PLA was always afraid they could not compete with them. 1967, Establishment 22 was expected to rename the Special Frontier Force. Mr. Ban revealed the story behind the name special because they were special force commandos. We use the word frontier because my family belonged to the Hazara district of the Northwest Frontier Province of undivided India, he recalled, and not because of any intent to limit where they could be deployed. They would finally see action in 1971. They were deployed in the Chittagong hill tracts and fought with extraordinary valor. More than 50 would lay down their lives or sacrifice that was given the secrecy of outfit, never given its due recognitions. Fearless fighters. Fearless fighters. Mr. Ban would follow in his father's footsteps, also serving as Inspector General of SFF and leading them in battle, this time to Kargil in 1999 at heights of 14,000 feet in sub-zero temperature for a while, which he would receive later from the commendations from the Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee, having been in battle with SFF. He said, "There is one thing I learned: they are fearless and never ever hesitate." The recent development along the LAC has brought from the past through the SFF into the public attention. Earlier, the thinking was, when you have a secret weapon like this, you don't flout. We don't flout it, he said. This time is a great distinction. Earlier they were used in the covert manner, but now it's against China, so we are sending a clear message even to the people of Tibet. Jayadev Ranade, a former additional secretary in the cabinet secretary and the SFF, has been force of the blooded in the battle, but one that has always operated in the shadows. The Chinese were shadows. Chinese were not even aware of the SFF for 30 to 40 years. He said, "I think this time the leak was done deliberately to send the signal to Tibetan inside Tibet that your brethren are fighting for you." The PLA has been trying too hard to recruit Tibetans in the army and in militia outfits. Added Tibetologist Cloud RP, the message will reach Tibet that SFF have already taken that step. And now from the polity, a little bit upon polity of Lakshmikant, and I would like to share some of the element of the basic structure. The present petitions is that Parliament under Article 368 can amend any part of the Constitution, including fundamental rights, but without affecting the basic structure of the Constitution. However, the Supreme Court is yet to define or clarify to what constitute the basic structure of the Constitution. From the various judgments, the following have emerged as the basic features of the Constitution and elements of the basic structure of the Constitution: supremacy of the Constitution, sovereign, democratic, and republican nature of the Indian polity, secular character of Constitution, separation of powers between the legislature and the executive and the judiciary, federal structure of the Constitution, unity and integrity of the nation, welfare state, socio-economic justice, Judicial review, freedom and dignity of individual, parliamentary system, rule of law, harmony and balance between fundamental rights and directive principles, principle of equality, free and fair election, independence of judiciary, limited powers in parliament to amend the constitution, effective access to justice, principle or essence underlying fundamental rights, power of the Supreme Court under Article 32, 136, 141, 142, powers of the High Courts under Article 226 and 227. Thank you.